Okay. All right. We are now live. Welcome, everyone. My name is Mike Neal. I am the founder of OfferGoblin. It is a investment banking interview prep platform. You probably heard of it. And this is Ryan Tan. I'll let him introduce himself.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, guys. My name's Ryan. I'm currently an instructor with Training the Street. I'm also a investment banking coach with Mike here. Quick background about me. I was a healthcare banker at Wells for 5 years, where I served as staffer and as well as trained 3 classes of summer and full-time analysts. So we're here to hopefully give you some secret inside cred to help you get started and to do well on your investment banking recruiting journey. And back to you, Mike.
Yes. Okay. So last week we talked about what is investment banking. That is a pretty important prerequisite. So if you haven't seen that video, you go look at that video to understand what we mean when we say, why should you get into investment banking? I think the first thing that we try to understand, and the question that you'll get is why banking? And as Ryan will kind of allude to, there's sort of two sides to that. But what's important is understanding your internal motivation as well, just so you have an understanding of yourself. But I'll pose that question first to you, Ryan. Why banking? Why do you think people go into banking? What do they actually want?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So from the internal perspective is as a career, if you're a 22, coming out of college, it's the best training you can get out of any work experience, right? 2 years, you're going to work really hard. You're going to get lots of exposure to business. For example, you're going to learn about why companies acquire each other. You're going to learn how to talk with clients. You're going to learn how to own processes and deals. You're going to learn a lot about finance and business, and you're going to have immense amount of responsibilities. And it's hard to think of any other role where you would be stuck in front of a CFO to basically advise them on a merger. So it's the best learning and growth opportunity for someone coming out of college. And it also opens a lot of career exit opportunities as well. And looks like we've lost Mike again. And Mike
Okay,
is back.
now I'm genuinely unhappy.
Once is unfortunate,
Oh,
twice is a coincidence, 3 times is a quality control issue on behalf of the.
okay. I think if you just talk really slowly, Ryan, we won't have any problems. It's too much information per minute. That's the problem. It's crashing my network. Um, okay. So I think I know kind of what you were saying because I probably have a tendency to agree, right? That you have this sort of reason that is public and the reason that is private. And the public reason is needs to have some kind of motivation to it that's a little bit further than saying you're doing it for money. And I also think that your internal motivation should be greater than money because it's a very expensive career path, not from the perspective of um, from like the money that you spend, but from the amount of time and cost and that sort of thing. And so that's kind of the second part of this that I want to talk about is what is sort of the cost of doing this. If you're thinking about doing banking, yes, you have the upside, which we kind of talked about, but there's also downside that essentially you're trading for that. So to talk a little bit on that front, you are trading a lot of your time, a lot of your energy, and a lot of your attention. I think that the primary thing that people struggle with is that you don't really have a lot of disconnect. If you sign up, you're pretty much on board for 2 years, and there's really not a lot of getting out of that. If you're ever needed late at night or on the weekends or things like that. Are you?
Yeah,
Do you hear me, Ryan? Am I like
I
coming
hear you,
through?
Mike.
Am I coming through all right?
You're coming through
Okay.
loud and clear.
Um,
I was gonna add on
okay,
saying
good.
on your on board part, I was like, when we say on board, you are really on board. You are never away too far from your phone, your laptop. You are on call. It's like you are literally taking finals. Sorry about that. Um, you're taking finals literally. Think of it for 2 years of your life. You have those dinner plans. Hey, VP calls, says, got to start prepping for those um, that deal. It's gone live. You got to cancel that dinner. It's you are really on
Yes.
call.
So I think I figured out that in part opening Google Docs for whatever reason just hogs up all my bandwidth and
Mm,
causes this thing to crash. So we're gonna go without notes. But I remember what we had. Okay, so we talked about whether you should do it, whether you should not do it. I want to talk a little bit more about some of the realities of doing it in terms of upside. So, if you're an MBA student, for example, on our website, we did an LBO of going into banking because the way you should think about it is that the debt that you're taking on for student loans is essentially the same as if you were imagine you're acquiring a machine that makes money, right? That's the banking career. And in order for you to basically make sense of that, you can do an LBO. That LBO has a positive and strong IRR, but it kind of depends on your starting point. If you were already making, let's say, $200,000 a year and you had relatively good exits or future opportunities, you're probably not going to make an outsized return doing an MBA and going into banking. That said, like for me, I was working at Deloitte. I got up to I think I was probably making like 125K. I was living pretty well in Chicago, saving a lot of money. But then um, coming and doing the MBA, I got a scholarship, partial scholarship for that, and then I got an offer at Centerview. So immediately got I think it was a $15,000 sign-on bonus, or it might have been $25,000. And then I got another bonus when I started that was either 15 or 25 and made a bunch of money over the summer. I ended up making in the 10 weeks of work that I did $80,000. And that is the type of upside that you can expect to make, especially in a short period of time. But you do reach some kind of a plateau in terms of as an associate, you sort of linearly grow. You get another boost when you become a VP. Um, but if you're looking for this huge, like, becoming a billionaire upside, that's probably not within that path without taking an exit. So that's kind of my end of the MBA perspective. I'm curious, Ryan, how do you think about that sort of ROI for undergrads?
I think by far, unless you're doing AI or some sort of, it used to be tech used to pay very well, but it's very hard to get a job in tech now. But by far, I would say an investment banking analyst position, you're probably at a bulge, or let's just say a regular bulge, you're making at least 160 out of undergrad nowadays. In terms of base is about 110. And then you have a 40 to 50K bonus, and then inclusive of your sign-on bonus, is money that is hard to find in other roles. Um, and it grows very quickly, but the the trade-offs in lifestyle are very real. Oh no, we lost Mike. Or well, I'm here. Mike. Well, we'll pause here for a moment until Mike gets back with us. In the meantime, I'm happy to share with you some investment banking jokes, if you guys like. Ah, yes. All right.
Okay. Okay.
All good, Mike. Welcome back.
Uh, the show must go on. Okay. So where were we? $160,000 out of undergrad is absolutely insane. I feel like.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the thing is, yes, you can always make more than that, but pretty much you reach the maximum threshold of lifestyle where you can go to any restaurant you want. You are really not limited. You can go on vacation wherever you want. You can pretty much do whatever you want at that point.
Yeah.
The biggest thing, as we mentioned, is that you really won't have time to do whatever you want because they're buying all of your time essentially in
Yeah.
bulk. So it's kind of a wholesale purchase of your time. So the dollar per hour ends up not being as probably strong as you might imagine. Um, I think the underrated thing, or sort of, I think one of the other reasons that people want to do it, and it makes a lot of sense, is that it's a very structured and sort of predictable path. Especially, again, from the MBA perspective, it's like if you're going and doing an MBA, um, you can go all sorts of different routes. You can go the route that I went and start a company. You can go into tech, all these other things. But if you
Mhm.
go into the route where you're going to go into banking, there's a very structured path. They'll tell you exactly what to do and who to talk to, and you'll funnel right into getting into banking. So I think that's another really important thing of like why you should do it. If that appeals to you, is that there's a lot of structure. And you can kind of just follow that. I'm curious, like how undergrads view. I think I maybe kind of know the answer to this, but how they view like prestige, because I always thought here's a really interesting story. I always kind of come back to is Jamie Dimon. I think he didn't his MBA at HBS. We talked about that in one of the first episodes. But then he ended up going to American Express after school, even though he had an offer at Goldman, which was considered Goldman was considered more prestigious, right? I would think that it's kind of rare for people to make that decision. But have you ever seen anyone make sort of surprising decisions about like in terms of going into banking, or someone who was really like teed up to go into banking and ended up not going into banking?
I think you see that you saw a dynamic shift when during the tech boom. I think that was where you saw people diverge. So some people like took up a role as a software engineer because the pay was competitive and the hours were great. This was back like maybe 5 years ago. But now that's a different story. Nowadays, you might see some where, like, let's say you get an offer at like OpenAI. Of course, you're going to OpenAI over like Morgan Stanley or Goldman. If you're winding the clock, maybe let's say 10, 15 years ago, there was very few, if any, highly competitive opportunities that would supersede banking. I mean, some
Hmm.
might go into consulting, but for the most part, if you got a Goldman offer versus a McKinsey offer, you're going to Goldman over McKinsey.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know if that was my choices. That's a really good question to pose people, like kind of an interview question, I guess. I mean, I guess a bank might not ask that, but that's a good interview question is like, would you rather go to Goldman? I would maybe throw in Goldman, McKinsey, or like Palantir, or like some tech company like that. Um, but yeah, I think that's pretty spot on that IB is sort of it's sort of cycle proof in a way. Like the job doesn't change very quickly. I think that there's a lot of people worried about the job going away, or obviously it'll change, but with AI. And in my opinion, and the opinion, I don't want to speak for Ryan, but I hear this from other people as well, is that investment banking, especially M&A advisory, is going to probably be one of the last things that goes. The reason is that for the amount of money that's on the line and the importance of the accuracy of the model, it's going to end up being faster for someone to just manually build these financial models so that they know that they're accurate. Because if an AI did create it, they would end up having to go through and check every single detail anyway. So you kind of end up back at the same place. And to be honest, as someone who's, a tech founder, the the sort of vibe coding or AI coding, you kind of end up spending a lot of time correcting it anyway. And I know that that will always get better, but when you think about the thing is that in investment banking, the pressure on time is very tight. When a deal needs to happen, it needs to happen very quickly, and it needs to happen with extreme accuracy. And so AI kind of creates this level of you need to go and check it anyway, and it's faster to just have someone stay up all night and do it. Um, they pay so well that they can expect that out of people. Um, but I'm also curious about what you hear in terms of anxieties that people have about investment banking, Ryan, especially
Yeah.
undergrads.
So from an AI perspective, I think investment banking is here to stay, but AI is going to be a tool just like how Excel came in and was a tool to make things much more efficient, much quicker. I mean, investment banking existed before Excel, so it's not like Excel like wiped out investment bankers. You could just do more with it. I see it similarly with AI, right? You could, of course, you have to like proof all the numbers at the end, but it can generate if you're building a model with AI. It can give you a preliminary baseline to help you better understand certain drivers or to tweak certain things. But
Hmm.
at the end of the day, you need to have human taking responsibility. And I think that's also one of the main differentiators where investment banking is more resilient to survival compared to, let's say, consulting, is that consulting doesn't consulting just kind of shows up and puts in the hours, right? Whereas investment banking, you have to close the deal, right? Money changes hands.
Hmm. Yeah.
Whereas consulting just says, oh, we did the due diligence and here's our thoughts, and nobody looks at the report anyways. So
Hmm.
um, we'll definitely see either two things happen, right? Either you have fewer analysts to do the grunt work, like I think a lot of grunt work will get eliminated, but the industry is still going to be here.
Hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think ultimately a lot of jobs as they are already bullshit jobs, right? They were
Mm-hmm.
already jobs where you were kind of like moving on paper around or XYZ. I think there's a lot of inefficiencies economically in general that can be smoothed out with that in investment banking and otherwise. One example, and how we use the AI a ton over the summer, and I'm sure every firm does this, is research. So I used to have to do a lot of research, manual research, go look up these 10 websites, gather together Salesforce's offering and how does ServiceNow work and how all these different companies work. And now I can just ask a report and get a very clear report on that, right? So the manual work of doing that is kind of minimized, but there still needs to be someone that has to understand it. I thought that was one of the more like pithy quotes I've heard about AI was that you can outsource the thinking, but you can't outsource the understanding, which I think will always continue to apply in any really like client services domain. Because you also have, I mean, and to defend consulting a little bit, and this is sort of a tangent, but there is a little bit more like nuance in it. There's always these sort of like pockets of information that's within a company that really isn't totally understood and requires a lot of nuance. Like I remember we were doing a integration after a merger, and we were wondering like why aren't these two like why isn't this and this like combined, like what's going on here. And we came to realize that it was just because like these two groups just like didn't really like each other, and there was like this, I mean, there's no way that an AI could have said that, oh, the group director here doesn't like this guy. And what we ended up having to do was do like a workshop and kind of get them to get along. There's a lot of these like very minute human details of businesses that I think get overlooked, and people think that we're going to have like a centralized system that kind of knows everything. Um, but the last point I'll make on that, and where I think banking ties into it, is this: there's this essay from Hayek. I may have talked about this last episode, but there's this essay from Hayek, who Frederick Hayek, who's an economist, and he talks about how price is kind of the pinnacle of information. The price on something communicates a huge amount of information without really needing a lot of explanation to it. And what I mean by that is that if I were to say I'm going to pay you $100 of $100 per bag of rice that you can fit into a truck, you're going to fill the truck up. I might know that you have this truck and that truck fits 100 bags of rice. But if I say I pay you $100 per bag, you, with localized information about the truck, will shove bags of rice underneath the seat. You'll shove it in the dashboard. You'll find a way to make it work because by the price, I'm communicating to you that I really want this rice. And price is something economically that doesn't really have any real basis. It doesn't really mean anything. What is the price of a company? It's really hard to say, right? And we sort of back calculate those things with models and explanations and all of those things. But when you actually get into the room and you have like boards of directors talking about a merger, a lot of times they're talking about very personal things that really have nothing to do with finance. I mean, some of it will be like they're talking about who's going to run the company and why and who, what's, your opinion on this person and that person and how this the CEO is really upset or like he's in a really good mood, and so it can swing things really a lot, quite a lot, based on things that are not strictly quantitative. And I think that's something to understand, that not only is it that like AI can't just like replace that, and no like centralized system can just gather all that data and replace all that, but even more so, humans who have technical ability and also emotional intelligence are kind of required to navigate those things and understand the demands and the minute information involved.
Yeah, there's that human aspect. Is it's not going to get AI'd away. It's if you objectively look at all the advice that the different banks give when they go into pitches, they're generally not that different from each other that much.
Hmm.
And then so who do you pick the person you end up hiring, right? It's somebody you trust, somebody who's sort of and there's also sometimes with like I'd say there's a lot more to the process than just as you mentioned, just the financial deal aspects of it, right? There's a lot of the deals are sometimes made on the golf course or the nuances and ideas that are brainstormed that don't get put into the pitch deck. Or from a strategic thinking, it's coming from insights that you can't train an AI model on. So
Hmm. Yeah.
it's as you said, there's a lot more that goes into it. So I'm pretty sure AI is not going to take away investment banking.
Yeah. I think it's going to augment things, right? Let's talk about so in the question of like who should do investment banking, we kind of I think we've talked a lot about sort of the cost of it and maybe sort of the forecast of it. But let's also talk about like who does well and who doesn't do well. Because I think there's one thing, and maybe we can start with that on the recruitment level. And we talked a little
Mhm.
bit about that in the first episode. We talked about how like certain attributes allow people to do well. But if we were to really kind of define like in a sort of specific way, like let's talk about what are some examples that someone would be organically doing, which we think would make them a good candidate. So not things they're doing for presentational reasons, but things that they just, if you're the type of person who likes XYZ, then maybe you should try it.
I think first, well, so there's certain qualities I think definitely stand out a bit more. Is one just inherent grit? I mean, of course, the nature, the long hours of the job, but you see this as when I say grit, like this persistence to like I have to figure out the answer. I can't leave my desk until the assignment gets done. The ability to take
Hmm.
ownership, that quality, you'd be surprised, is not that common, right? A lot of people like to claim, say, hey, I'm happy to work hard. I could totally pull 100 hours a week. But you actually put them through the process. And this is where I think the investment banking process in it of itself is a good screener for if you can survive on the job. Is a lot of people, we had a kid when I was in banking where on her first week on the job, it was 10 o'clock. She's like, can I leave now? I have a date at 10 p.m. Well, that did not fly out well. And then on the weekend, the second year analyst who had been at the office till 2-3 a.m. every day for the last 2 weeks, closing, working on 3 live deals, had assigned the first year analyst that just came in to do something. And he called her. He's like, where are you? Why isn't this done? And she's like, well, I'm currently at the Hamptons right now. Let's just say she was pretty much gone by the end of the month. And like
Oh
it's like
man.
you got to take this as a, like, you just suck it up and like you got to do this job. And it's it's a job for those who can really take punishment, and it's not for those. It's like, sure, like the prestige, the money, those are all great, but they won't be able to carry you, um,
Hmm.
especially as the days get longer and longer.
So what, I mean, you've worked with a lot of candidates. So let's talk about when a candidate comes to you, let's say, and they're a freshman and they're like, I'm thinking about doing it. What hobby could they say they have that would kind of spark something in you that you're like, oh, this person could handle this? Is there anything that kind of jumps out? And I don't mean stuff that like, okay, yeah, they do like the modeling club or like they have
Mhm.
prior interest, but like sort of organic things that they would be doing that would give you that tell. Is there anything like that?
I think you see Division 1 athletes are good classic case studies because they have to put in that discipline week in, week out.
Mm.
But also is you can also generally get a pretty good sense within a 5 to 10 minute conversation of them. Is A, do they have very clear reasons on why they want to
Mm.
do banking? Have they done the homework? Have they showed up prepared? Um,
Yeah.
you see this is like, I think you see a lot of people chase banking. They've heard of it. They see it sexy, but they don't really put in the work, right? And
Yeah.
not only do you have to have the grit, you also have to have like that it's like this weird balance, able to take punishment, but then also be a go-getter at the same time.
Hmm.
And you'll see people, and this is where you'll differentiate. Like, if you could do grit, but you're not a go-getter, you might be able to like, get your way into banking, but you won't thrive. But the ones who really
Hmm.
thrive are also ones who can say, I could take the punishment, but also like, let me critically think, how can I figure this out? How do I make these processes
Yeah.
better? Let me understand what's going on. And that is something that is also that that's greatly missing in undergraduate candidates. Um, and in terms of, you look at what they do, is I think if you see a natural inherent curiosity to challenge themselves, right, in terms of whether or not, and this is in some sense also why you have like target schools are kind of like inherently targeted, because they sort of act as a filter that if you're able to get into a certain school, it does somehow screen to an extent on you being able to perform at that certain level. But I guess aside from athletics, if you send me your resume in, I can see that you're somebody who just constantly pushes yourself, whether it's, and it
Hmm.
doesn't there's no any specific one, but like
Yeah.
whether or not you did research or you went for a pitch competition or something, you're just like,
Yeah.
you'd be bored out of your mind sitting still. Like, I think
Yeah.
those are the type of people that would thrive.
Yeah. I will say on the athletic piece, so at Centerview in Menlo, the people that sat next to me, the other MBA associates, were like, one of them had been a professional golfer. One of them, I think, played football in college. Maybe two of them played football in college. One of them, I think, was in the military or something along those lines. So all of them were very, I don't know that I would say they're like health fanatics per se. Oh, and then one of them was like a rower in college. Um, and it wasn't really, I don't think it was really about the fact that they were healthy. I think that being healthy does help and having a tendency towards being healthy. I think it especially matters at the NBA level when you're older. Um, but I think it was more so the fact that they're used to pushing themselves and being in a team. And um, I myself am a triathlete. I was a wilderness guide. there's a book on there's a good book. The title, I haven't even read it, but the title, I love the title. It's called Conscious Use of Metaphor, and how athletics kind of pushes you to, it kind of teaches you to like push yourself outside of like your boundaries. I always love that because when you're run, I mean, I go on run, I work out probably 6 days a week. And I don't say that to like, it's not like I'm like, it's kind of like I have to do it. Like I'm the type of
Yeah.
person that has to do it. And that's why I think like that stands out in banking, because it's not like I do that to impress anyone. It's that I need to get pushed into that uncomfortable zone where I'm like redlining, and then I go and like sit down and do some like normal shit. It's like it's kind of hilarious actually, because it's like kind of almost like a double life. Um, but yeah, I think athletics is definitely one of those things. On the MBA level, I'll think about that for a moment. I think a lot of what I've seen for MBA associates is if you have some prior interest in finance and some ongoing interest in finance, that shows a little bit more of consideration. So like people getting, I think it's the CFA or one of those types of like certifications you can get, or having just engaged a little bit further with finance, even if that wasn't really your career. It does show that this wasn't just like a whim thing that you just came in to do. The difference being like, and for our undergraduate viewers, it's important to differentiate is that for MBAs, there's an expectation of a little, the prior, they sort of have like a prior background. So like the expectation around that is a little bit different. Um, but yeah, people that actually deeply engage with finance, I think tend to do really well at the MBA level, which is not really a surprise. Um, I think if there's another, I'm trying to think if there's like another like archetype that does well. I think, well, at least for the MBAs, I think that like and maybe this is the same in undergrad or across the board, but I think like the more like social person, somewhat like
Hmm.
gregarious person, because there's a lot of handshaking, especially
Yeah.
if you go to like, if you go to like an M7 or like a just a target MBA school, the banks come to you and there's a ton of events where you need to like go and basically hang out for like 2 hours in a suit and like talk to people and have a drink and eat dinner. And it's like, you kind of need to be like comfortable with that. For one, you'll burn yourself out if you're not. If that's like, I'm sort of introverted and I found that piece a little bit difficult. But for two, they're kind of assessing you throughout that. So there's like this very long phase of like social assessment. And I think later on we'll talk more about like coffee chats and how to get through sort of the networking pieces of that. But like suffice to say that like the more social people, like, oh, you're president of a club or something like that, they tend to also do pretty well in the banking process. So let's do the flip side of that, or maybe even like, let's say behaviors or things that you would spot that are sort of the opposite of that, or even if it's like sort of things that seem like the opposite, or but actually are good or something, or are positive signals.
Yeah.
What do you see on a resume sometimes where you're like, oh, this is like not, and besides, obviously like formatting issues and spelling issues, any,
Yeah.
issues, but like things on a resume where you're like, oh, that's not really a good sign.
Well, so mention to your experience, if there's like no finance experience at all, right, that resume is pretty much going into the trash, right? And I know you said the formatting stuff and all that is that's actually pretty important, right? If your
Yeah.
resume is not formatted, I think it's the basic thing of bankers have this anal OCD, attention to detail, and that is one of the quickest ways to get your resume tossed, I think, compared to other industries. But I will also say that when interacting with somebody face to face, like a coffee chat or just, you know, you could get a sense is whether or not they're fit for client service, because banking at the end of the day is also a
Mm.
sales job. Even if you come in as an analyst, your clients are not just sure the firms that you're working deals on, but your clients are also in some sense your VP, your associates, your senior bankers. And having that, you could say, cognitive awareness to say, how do I provide excellent customer service
Hmm.
is also not common. I think sometimes a lot of people nowadays live in a very entitled, or sort of say, hey, the world revolves around me, as opposed to when you're in banking, it's a very, right, for example, like when you send an email, you list everyone in order. The MD goes first, then the director, the VP, then associate. You always have in polite, very polite professional emails with hello and
Hmm.
thank you, right? You don't say hey, you don't say bro, you don't say what's up, right? You don't have lower cases. You'd be surprised by the things you see. And also there's that polished touch that you can kind of see how it's either reflected on your resume or your experiences, and you could see it pretty quickly within 5 to 10 minutes. I had another student like reach out to me, uh, and like if you're showing up with like a your like baseball cap backwards, right? That's I
Yeah.
could pretty much tell right there. It's like, I don't think
Yeah.
this is the
Yeah.
right industry. And then he was like, I want to get
Right.
girls because of investment banking. I'm like, okay, you're definitely not in the right industry, right? It's like, so
It's also
in
probably not the
yeah.
best place to get girls. Maybe it is. I don't know, but probably not because you'll be too busy to
No,
get any.
definitely not the right place. When I was in banking, everyone first year who started off, everyone on our floor broke up within the first year, except
Hmm.
for the one person that was smart enough to move in with his girlfriend. But even then, every day when he came into the office, he's like, "My girlfriend's gonna kill me if I show up back home late
Yeah.
again." So
There's a lot we can talk about relationships. I
yeah,
want to talk more about. So I think one of the things we're implicitly saying here when we're talking about like who does well, what are the traits that do well. If you kind of hear yourself in those things, like you would probably be stronger at banking, right?
yeah,
And that's not to say that you should or shouldn't do it based on that. But if you're trying, if those things apply to you, you can play to your strength. This may be a place that plays to your strength. On the other side, where we're talking about sort of the, let's say, red flags or things that like indicate that maybe it's not for you, I think what Ryan's getting to, besides sort of like, I think there's a lot, you need to be very type A, you need to be very polished. And part of that is also that you need to be committed, which, part of the reason we're doing this series and especially these last two is because we're trying to explain what the industry is and whether you should do it or not. And if you're committed, you need to be all the way committed. It's not really a thing that you can halfway commit to. Um, I would add some other things that I think, for one, I think someone who has a background where it seems like they're doing a lot of different things and they have trouble stringing it together as like a comprehensive story.
yeah,
I think one of the common things with undergrads that I talk to or meet is that they kind of have like a lot of fake internships, which like
ah,
you
yes,
probably know, you probably know
yes. I know
exactly what I'm
exactly who
talking
you're
about.
talking about.
It's not, no, it's not one person though. I don't think that there's, I think that it's actually
But
quite a
yes, it's also
common
a common theme. Yes.
phenomenon that there's a lot of people in general with uh especially undergrads where it's like they tell you that they've worked in VC and PE and at a startup and all these other things, and you start to like drill into some of it and you realize like, oh, they didn't really like, they weren't really that involved with all of that.
Yeah.
And the other thing is like them listing all of those various things also just indicates sort of a lack of focus or a lack of through
Yeah.
line. And there is a way to like maneuver that into a story, like saying like I tried this and I liked this part, so I did this one, and how that sort of like inches you closer along to banking, let's say. But for the most part, like it's better to have a more focused orient that would look stronger. Another thing I'll say from probably my own experience and other people who I think in MBA program. So MBA is a little different in that there are many people that are there because they're pivoting their career. So you'll meet a lot of
Mhm.
people that are coming from Teach for America or from consulting or from marketing, or they were in startups and now they want to do banking. And that's like a little more believable. I think the thing is that if you're like a truly creative person, like I would say that I am, like you probably are not really a great fit for banking. It's not a creative place. And
Yeah.
I don't think that anyone be should misunderstand and think that it is. Um there is it, and I don't mean that in like a pejorative way, like it's not a negative thing, but they like don't really care if you have like creative or interesting new ideas or things like that. What they really want is someone who can like deliver consistently under a deadline and kind of be predict like it's more about being like sort of predictable and robotic. Like the ideal banker is kind of robotic in that way. Um, One last thing I'll like throw in there, and this is maybe sort of more on the like whether you should do it or not, is like the cultural fit piece. And this can go either way, but I do think that there is the canonical like core banker person is what I would call the car watch golf guy. And that guy, like you don't need to be that guy, but you need to like get along with that kind of guy or it's
Yeah.
really not going to like go well for you because they pretty much run the bank. And whether that's right or wrong, like that's the reality of it. That's not me, but you will run into that person and the person who and the peer that you have who's at your school right now who is into that, like
Yeah.
they have that potential to do well because of that. um I don't know if you wanted to mention any more on that, Ryan. Otherwise I was going to talk about relationships because that's also kind of a funny,
It's
interesting.
I was just add to your point, like it is banking is still unfortunately a old frat club, right? It's like you could call it a old school blue blood, think old Connecticut, old money, where there is that secret inner circle that you have to play certain rules in certain games by, which whether or not, you know, like that's a different story we could get into, but unfortunately, like you do have to kind of know how to play that game in
Hmm.
terms sometimes to get into, especially if you're recruiting for New York. If you're recruiting for like out of New York, it's generally much better and it's more like less fratty, but
Yeah.
that's for another that's another
Yeah.
story.
I also think that like you have to believe that, at least in my opinion, and maybe we
Mhm.
disagree on this, is like you have to believe like that it's not unfortunate. Like you have to believe that it's like, oh, it's cool. Like you have to like you can't like go in and like resent that person. You have to go in and be like, yeah, like that's a cool watch, man. Like what else do you have? You know, even though that's not your thing. Um, because it's politics, right? And that's just the way that it is. They're your client. It's like if you had a client, you're not going to be like, "Oh, I don't care about anime. I don't care about whatever." You'd just be like, "Oh, that's great. What other anime do you watch?" You know? So like you kind of have to play along with that. You don't have to be that person though, because I think many of you are probably not, and you shouldn't think that that's a disqualifier because it's definitely not. But it's just to say, watch for that. So on relationships, I think relationships is a really interesting one, and I will say that for one, a lot of people that I've seen from the MBA side that have done really well, some of the ones that have done the best have a spouse or a partner in some way who did investment banking. And I think that why they do well is that they have a very like clear understanding of what it entails and how to sort of recover from it and sort of the lifestyle of it. So they kind of come in like knowing those things. And those people usually do pretty well. They can handle it. They kind of know they're getting into all of that. At Centerview, when all the associates in my office, almost all of them were married or getting married. So they were all in long term relationships, and I think that I think at the analysts, I don't think there were as many cases like that. Um, but for whatever reason, I think that that stability that all of them had, I think was an advantage. How they set that up or how they kind of landed in an agreement with their partner of how to do that, I don't know. Because as Ryan said, like for a lot of people, it's not sustainable and they don't really realize what they're getting into being in a relationship with someone who's in banking. I imagine that for a lot of them, they have some kind of understanding where, we're going to do this for 2 years or 3 years, and then we're going to leave, and then we're going to go and I'm going to do like a more chill future job or whatever. Um, but I'm curious if you've seen anyone actually start a relationship in banking or, well, here's a hot topic is like a relationship within a bank, people, coworkers dating and things like that.
Oh man, I have. We're gonna. This is gonna open a whole can of worms, but we could definitely speak for another hour in terms of dating within the bank, affairs within the bank, also inappropriate power structures. It happens, but I'd say, but to tie up on the note, because I know we're
Yeah,
close
we're
to the
coming up
hour,
on time. Yeah.
is that that I think the best relations that work in banking are the ones who, before you get in, you're just because you're working the long hours doesn't mean your partner doesn't have sacrifice as well, right? So
Hmm.
the best ones they go in as a team. It's like, okay, we're both kind of it's going to suck for both of us, right? And then I think the other part that it generally works out well is generally if busy people date busy people, so like bankers and
Mm,
lawyers, or bankers and doctors, or bankers with people going through residency,
right.
or med school. Those have been pretty stable relationships, but they're
Yeah.
they're usually pretty unstable if somebody's working 8 hours a day and someone's working like
Yeah.
maybe like totally different. So,
Yeah. Well, you have to tune in next week when Ryan tells all
oh
about
God,
the next round of scandal. But
need to need to have everyone sign an NDA.
this has been a another episode of Offer Goblin Live. Hopefully next week we have less technical difficulties. Hope you've enjoyed and tune in next week.
Yeah.